Children, can't live with them, can't live without them.
Hello. For my first implementation breakdown, I'm going to look at Hansel, created in collaboration with fellow jammers Zoped, Saltmonger and Turtletennis. It's a game jam for a pet simulation game. In this case, we're doing a sort of inverted pet simulator where you're the witch from Hansel and Gretel, and you need to fatten Hansel up to eat him. It's a pretty silly game. We wanted to make Hansel really annoying, so we recorded his voice demanding different things to add to his character and to give the player feedback to help them win. In this video, I'm going to break down how I made a simple dialogue system within native Unity C# without middleware, suitable for a WebGL build. I'm not going to spend too much time on the sounds themselves, as they're pretty self-explanatory, but if you want to see if you want to check it out in action, you can play it for free on the link that I'll put in the description. So I always wanted to make tools that simplify the connection for the programmers to the sound design. I created a singleton voice manager to hold data and methods to do with dialogue. It runs in parallel to the audio manager, which is really just because creating submixes without audio mixes is a little bit long-winded. And I can't use audio mixes because in the WebGL target for Unity is part of the audio mixes are part of the integrated Fmod tools, which don't build. Anyway, the voice manager gives programs a single interface to trigger dialogue. As you can see from this gameplay script, pet stats, the highlighted line calls a method on the voice manager to play Hansel complaint. Passing an enum argument that states which need Hansel has, in this case hunger. Enums are super useful because they let me create switch statements that are easily readable. Using an enum argument rather than exposing all of the individual methods is a lot neater and allows me to group similar methods, such as the complaint dialogue in this case. So you see I've got all my footstep weight, food texture, cauldron ingredient Hansel needs, and these correlate to different gameplay events that need sound. And sometimes these things will already be enums created by gameplay events, by the gameplay programmers, but in this case I've created them for the sound implementation. So in this case, the switch triggers the play random method on Hansel stat alert hunger. As you can see, this refers to a custom class, the dialogue element. Let's have a look at what that is in more detail. So this is the core of the dialogue system in Hansel. It contains the information for each voice emitter, Hansel, the witch, and the frog phone. It holds references to each specific audio clip and public methods for triggering playback on the audio sources that correspond to each character. Each dialogue element contains a list of audio clips, which I can add to, reorder, and swap out in the inspector. I've made the class system serializable, which allows the voice manager to hold multiple distinct dialogue elements within their own properties. The play new method allows me to reference a specific audio clip. For instance, the phone rings intermittently throughout the game to give you clues on how to keep Hansel alive, and we need to specify that clip precisely at each time that it rings. However, most of the dialogue is triggered with the play random method, which does what it says on the tin and chooses from a list of audio clips associated with this dialogue element at random and plays it back. It's super simple. Eagle-eyed viewers will see that I'm not triggering an audio source directly, but a script called audio source controller. This is a script of mine that extends Unity's audio functionality. I won't get into it here because I'm not using it extensively. Here I'm just using the play new method, which stops the playing clip, loads a given clip, and then plays it. So I just want to draw attention to a couple of important booleans as well that are part of this the dialogue element class. Do not repeat clips and interrupt other clips on voice. You can see here that if do not repeat clips is checked, once a clip is played with play random, it's removed from the list of clips from the rest of the play session. This means that I can ensure dialogue lines that might get repetitive aren't heard again. And here you can see the functionality for interrupt other clips on voice. That means that if this audio clip is triggered, it will stop whatever's currently playing, which is the default behavior for audio sources and for the audio source controller. However, sometimes I don't want to do this. Some lines are very important for the player to hear, such as that Hansel is dying of boredom and it means the game is nearly lost. And others are not at all, such as the witch moaning about her back. So this lets me essentially set a low priority flag on certain lines by setting this boolean to false. This means that I reduce the chance that the player doesn't hear important feedback. So back in Unity, you can see that I can add and monitor the references to all of the dialogue elements in the inspector. I can add, reorder, and remove audio clips that relate to each gameplay element without editing any more code. I can see at a glance where we might need to record more voice clips. I can change the behavior for each dialogue element individually depending on the type of line and how important it is. And most crucially, the calls to each of those are exposed in a neat manner for programmers so that they know that if they want Hansel to complain that he needs entertainment, they just call play Hansel complaint with the argument entertainment and the voice manager does the rest. So after a jam, I like to tidy the scripts and make them modular so that I can use them in future. The way the voice manager worked was a little bit messy because I would add these dialogue elements directly in code. You can see that at the top of here, it's just full of these dialogue elements that I've then grouped in the code by the different groups, but it's quite messy. Also, some of them ended up empty since we didn't have time to record voice for them, and it ends up being a little bit difficult to look through both in the inspector and here. If the project got bigger, it definitely wouldn't scale with it, which is a big problem. So what I did afterwards to try and make it more sort of future-proof was create dialogue playback, a dialogue playback script, which was sort of a more generalized script. And in this, it means that I can create and assign different characters, their lines and their audio clips very much more quickly. So what I'm just going to go through now is this script as the kind of legacy of the game jam. So the original voice manager needed me to specify the character in each dialogue element, which took up space and time. But here I've created another level of embedded list called speaking characters, which contain the character's name and which audio source to use as an emitter. So if I go back to Unity, I can show you how this works. So I've got here an empty dialogue playback script. And for instance, I've got a character, let's call them Brian. And then I can add that audio source. Let's say it's Cat Brush or whatever, but it would be Brian's face. And then, okay, and then I want this first line to be an introduction, and I might want several different clips that introduction might give. So I might add a few of these, and those would be sort of different clips that they might say, and then with the same kind of functionality that I had in the voice manager, trigger these different clips at random, and then you can hear them go. And I can change things like do not repeat clips, just as I had in the other ones, and allow interruptions, which is a variation on what I had in voice manager. So if we look at how this works, the structure is basically the same. At the sort of core of it is this thing called dialogue line, which is the same as what was called a dialogue element in voice manager. It's the same thing. It just holds lists of audio clips, which can be played by index or at random. Above that, we've got this thing that I mentioned, the speaking character. The dialogue lines are all enclosed within speaking characters by creating a list of dialogue lines here. Since two characters wouldn't ever share the same audio clips. And it allows for greater organization since I can expand the lists of the character I'm looking at in the inspector and then leave the rest collapsed. So if I was looking at specific lines of a specific character, I wouldn't have to scroll through all of the different things at once, and it would make it a lot easier, especially for a game with more characters and more lines. The name field in both of these is new. You'll see that when I change the field, as I changed it in Unity, the header that before said element 0 in the list changes to the name of the character or line, which is taking advantage of the list UI in the inspector, and it will help on a project of larger scale with lots and lots of speaking characters because you can leave them all collapsed again and you can see just their lines and you don't have to look in detail at all of them. So if we go up to the top, and I'll explain this logic here. So in Hansel, I added each dialogue line in code rather than creating lists. You see here it was like super messy with all these dialogue elements. But here I wanted to create a list which was dynamic and able to be flexible. And although the voice manager in Hansel was less flexible, by hard coding the methods, a programmer or myself can be sure that they're triggering the right line, just like we saw with trigger Hansel complaints and then passing the argument. But of course I can't do that if everything is created dynamically and things are created at runtime or passed at runtime. So I could use index numbers and look at the inspector to see which line correlates to which index, but that's a problem too, because it becomes really problematic if I decide to reorder or remove any clips. For instance, if I addressed line at index 3 and later removed that line, but there was a new line at index 3 that was previously at index 4, I wouldn't know without hearing the error in game, as it would still successfully play back. So another use of the name field is to provide a string value that can be passed instead of using index numbers. By using a string, it will play the correct line back regardless of its position, and if it's been edited or removed, it will throw an error rather than playing back the incorrect line. So I guess if I looked at this in future, I'd look to using a specific data structure to hold each line so that instead of using verbatim string values, it would hold references, meaning that I could change the names of lines and characters without having to update them elsewhere, which is one of the drawbacks of using strings. But I think this is still much stronger and holds up for future projects. The advantage of using it directly in Unity is that you can set and assign clips directly in the inspector, rather than having to rely on external references. By double-clicking the clip field in Unity, you can also listen to them and quickly check that each clip from the line matches the others. Finally, it allows you to plan ahead. I could put the necessary structure in place before receiving the actual audio clips, meaning that once I get them, all I need to do is drop them in. So thanks for watching this breakdown of the dialogue system in Hansel. It's pretty basic and was built specifically for this small scale of game, but it's made my life a lot easier when adding dialogue to other projects afterwards. Have a look at my game audio website for more videos and visit my blog Impulse and Response to read more about sound explorations.